Hi, it's Polina with another art supplies review video. I know you love this kind of stuff, so let's get started. In this video, I'll be testing a new album with cotton top paper sent to me by Ohuhu. If you follow my channel, you are already familiar with this brand. I reviewed their markers and graphic sketchbooks before, and they recently released a new product, and it's watercolor paper sketchbook. There are two types of this album format, with hot pressed and cold pressed paper. I'll explain more about this later, and now let's take a closer look at the product. The sketchbook has a rather pleasing cover design with a very beautiful landscape. Here you can also see all basic information about this product. When buying the sketchbook on the website, you can choose the paper type, the number of sheets, and the album size. I received a 9 to 12 inches sketchbook, which is slightly larger than A4 format. The sheets are quite thick, 30 grams, and it's just what we need for painting with watercolor. It also has the FSC logo, Certificate for Responsible Forest Management. On the back of the album, you'll find information about the manufacturer and importers. The sketchbook is glued on the top side, and the sheets can be easily removed if needed. The paper has a natural white color, very smooth, with a pleasant, subtle texture. And it's not very noticeable under normal light, but at sunset I see some more striped texture on the paper. On the back of the paper it's slightly more pronounced than on the front. By the way, I forgot to mention the main feature of this paper. What the brand decided to do is to combine cotton and cellulose without mixing the fibers together, as is the case with 20% cotton paper, for example. Instead, Ohuhu decided to layer entire paper kinds together, like a pie, resulting in 100% cotton on top, an absorbent layer inside, and a cellulose layer underneath. And according to the manufacturer, the top layer of cotton should produce results similar to those of professional cotton paper, while the bottom layer of cellulose allows the sketchbook to remain affordable. So that's the main idea, and I can't wait to try it out. And now I'll be testing the paper for the following criteria: uniform, smooth wash, gradient, and color edges. Water load test, an important factor in watercolor paper. Pigment lifting, how well the color can be washed out. Glazing, is the paper suitable for layering technique. Durability, how easy the paper can be damaged during work. And detailing, checking the clarity and smoothness of the lines. And finally, I will summarize my observations and share the strong and weak sides of this product. So, let's start with the first test. To be sure, I'm doing a couple of washes with different colors. And while I'm at it, I want to briefly explain paper types for those who aren't familiar. There are three types of paper: hot press, cold press, and rough paper. Hot press paper has smoother texture and is often used for botanical painting and detailed illustrations. Cold press paper is the most popular. It has more texture and is often used for landscapes and more painterly works. It also brings out the granulation effect. Rough paper has a very pronounced texture and is suitable for expressive painting, and it also enhances the granulation even more. I got a hot press paper sketchbook, and I'm honestly very happy about it, as all my watercolor sketchbooks have a kind of texture, and I've been wanting to try this smooth type of paper for a long time. From my first impression, I was truly surprised by how the paper resembled pure cotton. When making a wash, I had no trouble controlling the paint, and the wash initially looked quite uniform. However, after drying, some nuances emerged, which I will discuss later. The edges of the washes generally look good, with sometimes more pronounced borders. In my experience, this depends on the amount of water I use. The more water in the wash, the more pronounced the edges will be. The gradients also turn out nice and smooth. The pigment spreads easily and evenly, and I'm pretty satisfied with this. I tried creating a gradient with both a semi-dry brush on wet paint and a semi-dry blend where I simply push two colors into each other. Now, let's see how the paper reacts to water. For a note, cotton typically absorbs water slowly and evenly, making it easier to work with the wet-on-wet technique. Cellulose, on the other hand, absorbs water more quickly and less evenly, making it suitable for quick sketches and drawings. So I'm very interested to see how this paper will do in this test. If you put a large drop of the paint on a Ohuhu paper, it will dry steadily, quite slowly. When I paint a full sheet, the paper curls up a lot, and as the paper dries after about 5 minutes, it straightens out on its own. This was a big surprise to me, but I haven't done washes like this in about 10 years, so I might have forgotten. If anyone knows, could you please tell me, is this normal? But therefore, I would secure the paper to the bed before working on it, so I can paint on it with wet on wet without worrying. Overall, I think the washes turn out quite well. And the backside of the paper behaves like cellulose, which is logical. I did a few tests on it as well, here you can see it. In my next experiment, I create a semi-dark wash and wash out the pigment with a dry brush and a napkin. I also performed this test on already dried paint. At this point, I was quite impressed. The pigment lifts off the sheet incredibly easy, both as soon as the paint is applied and after it's completely dry. And the paper doesn't suffer. This is probably the cleanest wash I've ever seen. See for yourself, the paint washes out almost completely. I found this effect very interesting, as washout is often easier on cellulose paper, because their paint remains on the surface. So it feels to me like the paper behaves like cotton when painting, and then it behaves like cellulose when washing. So that's convenient. But therefore I'm very curious how this paper will perform in glazing techniques, where layers of paint need to be applied on top of each other. At the same time, if you leave the paint while it's wet, as I do on the balls here to achieve the highlight effect, the paper behaves more like cotton. Although the transition from the white to color isn't always as smooth as on 100% cotton paper, the result can be controlled somewhat by varying the wetness of the brush. For example, if you remove pigment with a very dry brush, the edges of the highlight on the ball will be more rough, and if the brush is not completely dry, the transition will be a bit smoother. Here I'm talking about the cotton paper side, of course. One of the most interesting tests, in my opinion, especially after the previous one, is glazing. Here I lay transparent layers on top of each other and look how the paint behaves. If the color retains its saturation, if the surface begins to spoil, and if the previous layer blurs. The key here is to wait until the bottom layer is completely dry. So I made a couple of swatches on this paper. The first with different colors and the other two circles with the same color. In my experiment, to my big surprise, the layering looked very good. When completely dry, the bottom layers don't rub off, the edges remain crisp and the colors don't seem to fade. One layer bled because I didn't wait enough for it to dry. Oopsie. And this is how the circles turned out. Here I was checking how the color looked when layered to see if it became muddy. All of the above applies to thin layers of paint. During my test, the paper behaves perfectly fine here. And in theory, that's how the layering technique works. But if you go further and apply paint over a more pigmented layer, the underlying layer may bleed a little, so you have to be very careful with that. I experienced bleed even when I applied a layer over yesterday's wash, meaning the underlying layer was definitely dry. I have noticed that this bleeding occurs when you brush over the top layer more than twice. But if you draw a line once or twice over the same spots, all the layers will usually stay in place. You just have to keep this in mind when working. Just for fun, I ran the same test on 100% cotton paper from Arches and the results were similar. With normal pigment lifting, the paper doesn't worsen. Only under very heavy pressure did I seem to see the fibers of paper, but only very slightly, no matter how hard I brushed it. After the lifting, I let the paper dry for a bit and applied a couple more layers of paint on top. A slight roughness was visible as it dried, although unless you look closely it's not noticeable. When I experimented with an eraser, things looked different here. Here I drew with a 6B pencil and then I rubbed the paper quite much with an old eraser, and next to it I did the same test with a more delicate eraser. When painting the rubbed area, the loosened paper fibers were visible. As it dries, the effect diminishes slightly and the damage to the paper is no longer as noticeable. After drying, you can barely feel the damaged area, and the area where I used the soft eraser doesn't feel any different at all. Also, the coloring in the erased area on the left was very uneven, most likely due to the damage to the paper. Overall, I'm very pleased with the results of the durability test, especially compared to the cellulose paper I sometimes use. The difference is obvious. Fine lines on this paper are very crisp and don't smudge. And because of its minimal texture, the paper allows for very fine detail work. I also did a couple of additional experiments. Just out of curiosity, I applied paint to a colored pencil to see if the wash would be even. And yes, the paint laid well on the colored pencil. I also tried a watercolor pencil here, and it also worked great on the paper. I even drew a couple of lines in a wet area, and the paper remained intact. So, what pros and cons I found working with this product and what thoughts I have about it. Starting with the packaging. The album arrives packed in thin plastic, which protects it well from moisture. However, the package isn't very well protected from damaged corners. For example, I was unlucky and the entire album arrived with dented corner on the lower left side. Therefore, I would like the product to be a little better protected from damage during transportation. I like that the sketchbook has a very attractive and clear and simple design. In my opinion, it would have also been great if the artist's name had been included in the cover for even more inspiration. Another significant plus is the price. It may vary depending on your region, but here in Europe it costs €13.95, which is cheaper than my other brand sketchbook of 100% cellulose. Now, a little bit about the product quality. The paper is durable, comfortable to work with, and you don't have to worry about damaging it if you wash out the colors, which is especially convenient if you are a beginner. From what I see on the testing, the front side of the paper behaves much like cotton, producing beautiful, smooth gradients and is generally easy to work on. I only found one significant issue I have to mention. It's white spots in my washes as the paint dries. They didn't appear in all of my washes, but they were very visible in pink, green and violet colors here. And it's also visible on the test on the back side of the paper. This effect is definitely worth considering when creating an artwork. Another advantage of this sketchbook, in my opinion, is the double-sided paper. Personally, I think this is a great idea because you can compare two types of paper and see which suits your style better. After all, some artists specifically work on cellulose. The other side of the paper can also be used for sketches or as a color palette reference while painting. Overall, I can recommend the sketchbook. I really think it's quite good, especially for the price, and I could definitely find a use for it, maybe not for professional or commissioned work, but definitely for sketches, small personal pieces and watercolor experiments. This album definitely won't be sitting on my bookshelf, and I'm looking forward to a free day to try painting something on this paper and see how it develops. I might even have some new thoughts and notes about it, which I'll definitely share in my chats on Patreon and on Telegram. If you are interested in more frequent updates and a little insights into my work, feel free to join. Both chats have free access. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to my Patreon subscribers who support my work financially. I thank you so much, guys. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I'll see you in the next video.